Thank you very much and welcome to the 3 o'clock session. My name's Darren McTeague. I'm from Surety. I'm MC today. Our next speaker, Clare Mclennan. Clare comes up from Christchurch. She's an independent consultant and is presenting on cultural cringe, which I'm intrigued to find out what that's about. Just by way of intro, Clare is a freelance Agile development specialist with a real passion for bringing together people collaboratively with a big focus on software quality. She's a strong Agilist. She's worked in Agile for about 10 years, I believe. And as a consultant, spends a lot of her time integrating and helping people integrate automated testing. So without any further ado, please welcome Clare.
Okay, can you all hear me? Okay, great, okay. I think I have an identity problem, or more to the fact, people have a problem identifying me. Because you see, when I say I work in IT, people seem to think I look like this. And I don't even have glasses. And they seem to think that I like to work late at night by myself in a room like this. And that's kind of disappointing because when they look at these stereotypes, they don't get to see the real me. You see, I'm an Agilist. You're more likely to find me doing this sort of thing, talking with people at the whiteboard, drawing ideas, collaborative thinking, or generally just talking. So why is it that people have got my job so wrong? Why is it that the public out there don't really know what we do? And I think the answer lies in history. That for a long while, and not very long ago, our job was primarily this. People sitting at desks, working by themselves, and this is what we've hired people to do for a very long time. But with the advent of Agile, things have changed. We're now looking at a job which involves a lot of communication, people working with people. And this is a huge change for many people. There's another reason why we find collaboration quite hard. And to show you this one, I need to take you back to school. There's another word they use for collaboration at school. Does anyone know what it is? True. Okay. That's definitely one of them. It's a bit like wagging. Think exams, think tests. What is it called? Cheating. And there's another lesson we learn at school which we sort of have to unlearn when we do Agile. And that's the answer to this question. Who has all the answers? Why, of course, the teacher has all the answers. But in our work, no one person has all the answers like this. And so the situation is quite different. These pictures actually come from a bunch of students that I work with at Unlimited, which is an alternative school in Christchurch. And they were doing a course on computer programming, gaming, and this is actually their teacher, Renee, and it's really fabulous because whenever they hit a problem, they'd come to Renee and say, I can't do this, and Renee doesn't know a single thing about programming. She thinks she'll learn one day, but she never gets around to it. So her job is completely just facilitation. She gets the boys to help each other, teach each other, and she finds mentors outside of the team who can help solve their problems. Okay, so we've had a bit of a giggle. That was a good start. Now the real work begins. And I want you to become involved. So, to start with, I want you to answer this question. And you've all got this device on the end of your shoulder. I want you to use it. So, put your hand up if your team does a daily stand-up. Great. Oh, this is awesome. Are there any teams out there that do stand-ups but not daily? Great. Are there any person who works on a team that doesn't do any stand-ups? Awesome. Great. Okay, so please answer this question. Are stand-ups good? There's a bit of nodding. Okay. So why are stand-ups good? Great. Now, a tougher one. How do you know that you're not doing a stand-up, so you're doing a daily stand-up and not a daily status meeting? Great. That's a good start. Has anyone else got any ideas? Some of you must be trained Scrum Masters. Right?
Talking to each other, not just one person.
Awesome. Answering the 3 questions. Has anyone else got any other suggestions? These are really good. So we're starting to talk about the behaviour that people were actually exhibiting. Now, I thought about this, and the questions I've answered up to now are, quite frankly, quite poor questions. So let's answer a better question. What behaviours make stand-ups a worthwhile investment of energy? So this is a better question because we're being a bit more specific, and we're actually also saying, you know, if we weren't standing up, we could do something else. What makes it more useful to do stand-ups? And for me personally, one of the critical things that I think about stand-ups is whether there's actually collaboration happening. So you can answer your 3 questions. Yeah, I did this yesterday. I'm doing this today. I've got no impediments. But that's no collaboration. So one of my ideas about whether stand-ups are worthwhile is whether people are actually collaborating and say, I'll help you after this. And not even just that in the meeting, whether after the meeting they actually go away and help each other. But this isn't really, my talk isn't really about that's the right answer. It's really about looking for the behaviour. And just as I was procrastinating writing this, I found this great quote. And I think it applies very much to Scrum. So it's not that your team is doing Scrum that will make it work fast. It's how your team does Scrum, what behaviour they exhibit. And this idea isn't just mine alone. So Martin Fowler talks about this in his blog. Actually, I don't think he wrote the blog, but basically in software, we have all these ideas about how we can run our software teams, but it's actually the subtle details that make it worthwhile or not worthwhile to run it in our particular context. So we have to stop thinking, oh, you know, Scrum is good, Kanban is good, and actually say, what makes Scrum good? What makes it good in our context? And start balancing things out that way. So I've already been introduced, but my name is Clare. I've done a lot of development, testing, automating testing. I try and do a little bit in aspiring, and at the moment I tend to do all 4 together because I come into teams who want automated testing, but like Goiko says, if automated testing is not your problem, then it's not actually worth solving it until we solve some other issues. But the key thing that I wanted to say is that I've worked with many companies, so what I bring today isn't about one company, it's about repeated patterns that I see happening all over. And today what I really want to talk about is about helping technically minded people to develop soft skills, communication skills, so that they can thrive. I hope many of you attended Steph's talk earlier because that will cover some of the material I'm talking about today. But what I'm really talking about is I think it's easy for the people who come to this conference, the extroverts, to pick up this material and run with it. But I think we need to actually push it out to the whole team. And I think that we can do that in a way that they will pick it up and think, this is great. I was talking to Tobias earlier, and he said that we can give it to the team as a gift. And I think that's a really, really nice way of putting it. So another quick questionnaire just before we get started. Who has taken their team and done some organisational training on them or done it yourself? So who's been on a Scrum course, who's been in Kanban? So quick poll. Lots of people. But these methodologies, to get the most benefit of them, they actually rest on some other skills, and one of them is technical. So has anyone actually done some technical training in any of these areas? Put your hand up. Yes, so that's a lot fewer people. And they also rest on a base level of communication skills. Who has done some communication skills training? Wow, that's pretty neat. And today I'm going to talk about this area, and I'm going to talk about it as a toolbox. And I think that's really important because I'm bringing skills, ideas, but it doesn't mean you have to implement them all. You can pick the ones that feel authentic to you and use those. And I'm not going to cover this in detail. I'm just trying to put it out there that these skills are learnable. And that is all so that we can avoid this, which I have seen in many organisations I've been to. I'm not going to embarrass you and ask you to put your hand up on this one, but I'm sure I'm getting some nods. Okay, so the plan, we've been through the change and really identified why we need to look at this. Let's look at team formation. What happens when you stick real people into a group and make them work together? Well, Ken Schwaber has a lot to say about this. He says that in Scrum, it's a container. As long as you get the people in with all the skills you need and the highest value problems, and you protect the container, maybe you shake it up a little bit, leave it for a while, and then later you open and inspect the results. What's it like? It's like a recipe book, you know. As long as you do all the steps, it will just work. So this is some people's thinking on this sort of issue. Another model that I think many of you have seen is this one. And I'm sure I'll get some nods of familiarity when I've talked to many teams and they're always like, are we forming or are we storming? We seem to be always forming or storming. Oh, that's because we've got a new team member, you know. Yeah, okay. So let's now look at some of the science behind this. I'd like to point out that this is from 1965. The science I'm going to talk about, I think, is from 2006. So Will Phelps did an experiment on this idea, and he took groups of 4 with her, and then he implanted an actor who was playing one of these roles. So depressive pessimist who doubts the group can complete a task, a jerk, or slacker. I mean a slacker. That can't be that disruptive. It's just a slacker. We have much more disruptive people in IT, I think. And what happened? Not everyone's much more disruptive, but there are a few who got their special character. What happened when he did this? Well, he actually found that the groups performed badly, okay, worse than other groups. I guess that's no surprise. But what is really scary is not only did the people who the actor behave this way, but others started to act the same way. They picked up the negative skills. So instead of the group bringing up this disruptive person, what actually happened was often in nearly all circumstances, the group would be brought down by this the disruptive person. People just didn't have the skills to deal with that person. So I guess if you look at the Tuckerman model, I've done my own tweaking to it, and I think it actually is something a bit like this. You go through the forming, you go through the storming, and eventually some sort of norm happens. You know, the group forms a way of working. But whether it goes to performing the way we want it to go, or whether it goes to deforming, will depend on the group. We can't just guarantee that as long as we wait long enough, we'll get up to performing. Luckily, Will Phelps' research also shows some positive things that could help us with this. There was one group in that research that performed really well despite the bad leader, and that was due to a great leader. The bad apple. He would ask questions, he would facilitate the group, and it turned out that this guy was actually the son of a diplomat. And I think this is something we can directly apply to Scrum, Agile transitions and to Agile in our workplace, because we can learn facilitation skills. I'll just let you read this, what facilitation was about. So this comes from the course that was run last year by the Agile Coaching Institute. Surety brought them out, and I was lucky enough to be on that course. And so I would now consider myself on my way to learning facilitation skills. It was a pretty powerful course. I can't give you all the outcomes in 2 minutes, but I can tell you a couple of things. One of the things we learnt, a tool, if you like, was check-ins. Start by engaging everyone. And you will note that at the start of this presentation, I actually did that. I got you all to raise this tool, put your arm up. Now, that's not a particularly good way of doing it. It's much better to get you all speaking, but this is a lot of you, and in this circumstance, this was the best I could do. So this is a simple tool anyone can learn and learn to apply. Another thing that I learnt on that course was that there are other ways of doing, of gathering information, of brainstorming. There are silent methods where you can get people to write on sticky notes by themselves and then share the information. Or you can also use this approach to get your backlog in order. You can actually order your backlog as a group silently. So there's a lot we can learn in this area. And I think this is really, really important for us in IT because we have a lot of people who are introverted. And these approaches are probably much more suited to those personality types. Actually, just before I did this presentation, I was talking to the guys next door, and they were saying something about this, which is now gone out of my head like that. Right, so facilitation is a learnable skill. Bringing this all back together, what does it tell us? Well, first of all, it tells us that most people lack the skills to deal with disruptive personalities if they haven't been trained. Bringing this together means that when we throw people in a box and leave them to it, then sure, we'll get team norms, but are they the powerful, collaborative team norms that are going to make our teams go faster? Or are they team norms where, well, only 3 people ever talk and the rest are too scared to, and they discuss things behind others' backs outside in the corridor? Or, and we have to be aware of that. So I want you to think for a minute. Are the norms of your team, whether you're working in the team or running the team, are your team norms increasing or getting in the way of collaboration? Maybe have a quick conversation with the person beside you of what you think of that. All right. Okay. So it sounds like there's some interesting conversations going on. I remind you that you can carry those on in the break. And the thing to take away is your Scrum Master or anyone in your team trained in facilitation. That's probably the easiest way to get collaboration better in your team, is to get someone who's passionate about it. Okay, so we've talked about team formation and facilitation. Now let's move on to one of my favourite topics, positivity. Now this is such a divisive topic when it comes to IT. I've talked to IT groups about this and they're like, oh, I don't want any of that namby-pamby tree-hugging stuff. So I've brought you some science again to help maybe convince you this time. Positivity is a powerful thing. This is a study done by Lasada. And what they did was they took 60 teams from a company and they rated them as either low, medium or high according to some metrics they had for these teams. And that included profitability statements, customer satisfaction, and 360-degree evaluations. So a variety of measures they looked at. They took all the high measures, and if people were high in all measures, teams were high in all measures, they made them a high team. If they were low in all measures, they made them a low team, and all the other teams were medium. There turned out to be 15 high teams, 26 medium teams, and 19 low teams. And what they discovered was there was a huge correlation between how much positive statements were being made between with the success of whether the team was a high-performing team or not. And the way they do this research is very interesting. So they take the team. I think for this research, they took them when they were discussing their annual plan, and they put them in a meeting and they videotape the team. And then after the meeting, people come along and they code all the statements that people say in the meeting. Now, an important thing to make it scientifically valid is also that the people doing the coding don't know which sort of team they're looking at. They're just coding. And this is the results. So let's clarify for a minute what I mean by positivity. Positivity is about acknowledging the good things that are happening. So it's not about saying, oh, everything is rosy, we've got no problems. It's not about saying we don't, it's not about ignoring problems and hoping they'll go away. It's not about even not talking about problems. All it's saying is make sure you acknowledge the good things that your teammates are doing. And why is positivity? Well, why could it be really, really important? Well, this is what it says in that article. Positivity generates expansive emotional spaces that open possibilities for action. I think my main takeaway from this is when I'm in a good mood, I'm much more in a position that I'm likely to listen to people and change my mind. And when I'm in a bad mood or feel like I've had a lot of losses, I'm just not as open. And I like to think of it like a car. Positivity is the fuel. It motivates us. Unless we feel that what we do and how we behave can make a difference, there's no point in really trying to take that energy and try and do things a bit differently. Critique is still important. It's the steering. It decides which way we're going to go. But we need this fuel to get anywhere. Now, the really stunning thing about positivity is the amount that you need. See this line? This line here is a 1-to-1 ratio. So what this is saying is good teams have 5 to 6 times as much positive comments being mentioned as negative ones. And that's a huge ratio. Now, the reason I believe this research is it correlates very tightly with some research that Gottman did earlier with the same methods with couples. So he looked at couples and he found out that, again, while arguing, healthy couples had a 5-to-1 ratio. So while you're in the heat of an argument, you're still saying nice things to each other. If it's below 1, you're headed for divorce. Don't try this at home, it might scare you. And it was quite interesting research because he ended up being able to predict divorce, I think, over a 6-year period. So he studied people and then brought them back into the lab later with about a 90% accuracy. And he did this using, I think, mainly positive-negative ratio and something he also called, I think, the 4 henchmen of divorce. And they are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. And if you actually look at those 4 things, they relate quite closely to the behaviours in Will Phelps' study. So the stuff's starting to look, quite consistent. Now change. Okay, does anyone out there know what this picture is about? Yeah, it's an Eskimo roll. Now, I've taught people to Eskimo roll, and I had a flatmate, and he decided one day, while we were sitting in the lounge, that he wanted to learn Eskimo roll. And he was a very intelligent guy. So we stand there around the lounge, we tipped over the kayak. But it's a complete failure. Why do you think it was a failure? Anyone got any idea? The thing about learning to Eskimo roll is not the action. It's the fact that the first thing most people want to do when they get underwater is they don't think, they just act. And the first thing they want to do is get out of their boat and get a breath as soon as possible. And I think this is quite similar to Agile change, because when we're moving to Agile, people have gone away from probably a structure they know. They get, maybe a developer gets a ticket, a task to do. They go away and do the task. Then they move on to the next task. Maybe it comes back later from the tester, not done. But in that situation, they know what to do. They know what successful looks like. But when you move to Agile, it's sort of like, oh my gosh, where am I? And I think in this situation, it's really important that people are in a space where they're open to change, that there's a good amount of positivity. So how do we implement this? Well, one thing that can work quite well, which is loosely based on gratitude exercises. Gratitude exercises are wonderful. Daily gratitude, that was something actually that Edwin talked about in the welcome this morning. And I think we could incorporate this idea if we need to in a stand-up with a team that's not going so well. So it's about standing up and saying one good thing that happened, one person that helped you, one person who had a good idea, what you finished. But start with that positivity and start pushing it through the team. Okay, so a change of gear. And this is where we start moving on to the stuff that Steph talked about earlier. So I'm hoping you're all there and I don't have to explain much. And it's about inquiry. So the same study that coded behaviour in these teams on a positive or negative effect also looked at whether statements were an inquiry, finding out why people thought the way, or whether they were an advocacy statement. I vote for you, you're great. This is quite a good time to talk about this because we're politicians. They're primarily here, probably adding a few lies as well. But yeah. If we want to make real change, and I think this is the problem with the political system, but now I'm getting sidetracked, and in our complex environments, we need to do some of this. Again, you'll see that this is something that the high-performance teams, they move between inquiry and advocacy. But the low-performance teams, they tend to stay mostly in advocacy. So I guess that means in terms of our stand-ups, either stand-ups are a good idea or they're a bad idea. There's no, well, they might be a good idea in this situation. So why is inquiry important? Well, there is too much data in this world. To see this, you can say there's 100 hours of uploaded to YouTube every minute. There's no way you can watch 100 hours in a minute. And I know you might say that watching cute cat videos may not help your team very much and isn't very relevant. Some of the other stats are. So Google, if you want a how-to stand-up meetings, then you get 28 million results. That's a lot of reading to do. And even when we're listening, even when you're listening to this presentation, chances are, for some of it, you are not thinking about what I'm saying, although you should be. You're thinking about the last presentation or whether lunch was any good. And this is especially true if you're actually involved in the argument or discussion, because you're thinking about what you need to say. It's very hard to think and to listen. And we don't notice raw pixels. There's a lot of filtering in what we see. So that's one issue. Another issue is we tend to talk in the real abstract. So let's consider the question, should we be holding stand-ups? These are all of the things that happen at different levels. Sure, we do some observing, we see and we hear. But we can't process all that. So we select the interesting parts. We parse the pure sound and the pure bitmaps into characters and words and faces. We interpret these messages. And then we start sort of doing some processing on top of it. We guess the perceptions that others might have of stand-ups, whether they think it's worthwhile. We assess alternative methods. Well, what can we do instead? And then we come up with a conclusion and we start having this conclusion. Yeah, I think stand-ups are great. We should do them. We should do more of them. Why just do one? You know, we could do them every 3 hours. That would be much more effective. And this also highlights the other reason why it's important to do inquiry, and that's because our view is incomplete. We can't go inside other people's heads and know what they're thinking. We can't predict the future. So it could be that the conclusion you have come to and the conclusion I have come to is different, purely because I think in the future we're going to have a bigger market share, and you think something else is going to come along and take half our market share. But until we actually bring that assumption into our conversation, then we might just end up not knowing why we're even in disagreement. So here is a model that I think a lot of people, especially very logical people, think about communication if they've never thought about it much. It's sort of the default model. We get inputs, we apply logic, and we make a decision. Now this can go very badly. Say there's a tester and a developer, and the developer has this model in their head, and they're disagreeing. If they both see the same stuff, what conclusion can they come to that they're disagreeing? How can you disagree? Yeah, but basically they think the input's the same, so they're thinking either that person is stupid, or I've actually seen it when they think, oh, I know that person's not stupid, therefore they're trying to trick me. And they don't think of it quite like that. I mean, that's the real left-hand column of if you read Agri's book, but sometimes that's what their behaviour indicates they could be thinking. So let's replace this with a better model. This is the one out of Crucial Conversations, and this is the one that I really struck first. We see here, we tell a story, and this is sort of the logic bit, but it's more saying that we incorporate it into our worldview. This causes us to feel in a particular way, and so we act out. The other model that is out there is the one by Chris Agrius. This is a simplified model. He's sort of got two versions of it than the one that Steph demonstrated. The key thing to this model is that there's this available data out there, and well, that's not the key thing, but there's this pool of available data, but it's not really a pool. It's a sea. It's overwhelming. From that data, we select the data we're going to look at, and then we interpret it and we draw conclusions. But the thing is that the conclusions we draw, they form our context and model, and they therefore alter what we see next time, as well as altering the action we take. So bringing this all together, and then Agrius talks about that we like to talk at the top of our ladders, which is the conclusions. And that's when we're in that mode of advocacy. Yeah, we should do this or we should do that. And we need to come down the ladder and start talking about why we think that. So bringing this all together, we need a new model. And I've called this a tool because I think if you introduce this to people, they can start thinking of having conversations in another way. So here we input data, we interpret it, and we output behaviour. I've sort of written these as things that might appeal to technical people. We've added a filter in the data. We've added past experience that alters the way we interpret it, and I've put a question mark. That's for things we're guessing, the assumptions we're making. By having this model, we now have these three things that we can start inquiring about what others think. And so once you've got this model, you can start inquiring. And that's where I think we need to start giving people the words that we need. And so start teaching inquiry language. And this may be as simple as a list, of questions to ask, reminding people not to choose anything they don't feel is authentic to them. And I think using an inspector gadget or something, is a good sort of model that might appeal to software developers because, you know, they're a person who solves problems. This is a problem to be solved. Why is it that you think differently than me? So this is one tool. What are some of the other tools that are in that in these literature? Another really great one is to paraphrase. So this is like, what I hear you saying is this. And then, of course, to follow it up with, have I heard you correctly? Or is there anything else you'd like to change or add? So opening it up for a discussion. To contrast and compare. I've actually already done this in my presentation. This is about talking about what something is about, but also talking what it's not about, so people are clear what you don't mean. And this one, agree and build, this is the big takeaway. When I did this, I realized that this was my biggest problem. Say I'm in a big passionate conversation with you and you're saying something and I'm like, and I hear something and it's wrong. You know, and you might have said a few things that are okay, but then you say something that's wrong. What do I focus on? What you said is wrong. And then I say, no, you're wrong. When really, I think it would have been slightly better for collaboration if I'd said, well, actually, see this bit? I agree with all of that. But there's a little bit. Can we talk about that further? So this is about acknowledging what you agree on and then discussing what you don't agree on, rather than going straight to the stuff that they've got wrong. And if there's any good reason for learning this stuff, this is it. Okay, so now we're getting towards the end of this presentation. And I've got a challenge for you. We've come a long way. Oh. We started by talking about the huge change that people who are part of teams undergo when they go from become an Agile team, depending on where they started, of course. We've talked about how a lot of organisations focus the training on organisational training, but to really get Scrum moving, to really get it successful and being super effective, you also need to look at the technical and communication side. But the question is, can communication skills really be taught? Aren't they just inborn? Well, I hope I've given you some skills, and over the next few days, you'll start to see for yourself. I hope something's new. That maybe just being aware of some of the things to look for is going to be helpful. But I've also got some case studies. This first one is myself. Now, I was actually one of those people, probably, you know, the people who like talking and an extrovert. And if anyone was going to have inborn skills, it was going to be me. And I can tell you, I have learned so much in the last 6 years about this stuff. And I'm still learning. But we're not all like me. Of course we should be. But then we couldn't collaborate very effectively. And the other, so I want to talk about this man. He's a really great man. He's my husband. When I found out about the positivity stuff, I talked to him about it, and nothing happened. Then a bit later, he started taking it on board, and it really makes a difference. Oh yeah, and he's not like me. He's an introvert. He's a C coder, codes in C, you know. So this stuff can be learned. I think the thing is, even technical people can gain a lot out of this. There's a lot of things they care about. Whoever learns it, you get more influence. If people listen, if you have better communication skills, people actually start listening to you, they respect you more. So if you care about code and technical structure, then they'll listen to you about code and technical structure. And that's pretty exciting. You get better decisions. I mean, we all hate it when you go out of a meeting and you're just like, oh my God, do we really have to do that? And you get quicker progress. I mean, I think every developer I've ever met wants to see the stuff that they wrote. Every tester wants to see it out in the world and see it successful. And finally, this is the fuzzy thing. You do get improved relationships, and I think that's really important. There's fewer jerks in the world. There's also some good stuff in the literature about this. So Crucial Conversations offer a training course. And they have some really interesting case studies. This one is Maine General Health. It's pretty frightening. Before they did any training on critical communications, only 10% of their staff felt that they would pull other staff members up if they saw a mistake or if they saw someone disrespecting a patient or something like that, which is pretty frightening if you're going into hospital. They did some training and they found out of the people trained, 50% would do it after that. So it's not 100%, but 50% is a huge increase from 10. The really interesting thing was that once they trained some of their staff, they found out even the people who hadn't been trained were much more likely to actually ask questions. So what they're saying is by training some people, the culture changed, and that meant that everyone benefited, especially the patients. And lastly, a little comment about introverts and about my special introvert. The main thing I want to do is tell you a story. So it's what my friend said. So we were at home one day, and my friend had come round, and it was about the third time she'd come round. And after she left, she said, "Oh my God, I didn't know he talked." Because you see, the first 2 times she came round, my husband said, "Oh, hello," and then said nothing else. The third time she came round, they were about to do a Rogaine. And my man is very passionate about Rogaine. And they were about to do a 24-hour Rogaine the next day, and there was another guy there who's into Rogaining, and they were just talking shit, like and he was as loud as anyone in the room. So the point is that most introverts will actually do want to contribute. It's just about getting them comfortable in the environment and with the people they're with. So if they feel they'll be listened to, then they will contribute. So it's been quite a whirlwind tour. Let's wrap it up now. I've got a challenge for you. I want you to help me change this industry. I want you to help me get this industry, get our heads out of the sand. I think we should start looking around, opening our eyes, and looking at the behaviour of our teams. What's really happening, not what we want to happen. We should feel a finger on the pulse about whether the team is in a good mood or whether they're struggling. And most importantly, we should help them all become curious, become detectives, become trying to solve the problem of why we have different agreements, not just who's right. I want your help by taking action to raise the collaboration skills in our industry.
Thank you very much. And brief. Is it Clare? Are there any questions? We've got a few minutes for questions.
Where do you start, Clare?
Well, I think what I really wanted to do was start the conversation today. I think Steph's got some great stuff. There are a few books. Crucial Conversations and Discussing the Undiscussable. It's great when you have someone else. They're on the slides. They're a great place to personally start. The Crucial Conversations training, but I think we actually, as an industry, we should start our own training that's targeted at the technical people.
Something I thought about during Steph's presentation earlier, and again now, it's
of cultural misinterpretation, misunderstanding, right? You know, I say a certain thing, speak in a certain way, in a certain tone, and that's perhaps fully misinterpreted, and I might misinterpret what someone else says, and I just wonder if either of the two of you have any thoughts about that, or I don't know if this is even in your area, but like around the critical communication and conversation and that, you know, how much is cultural linguistic tone a thing?
I'm going to let Steph answer after me.
Yeah.
I'll give it a try. Well, I'm going to add. To me, it comes down to a lot about trust.
Yep.
Like, if you trust that you are both trying to solve this problem, then you will get past that, you'll see past that. The first thing when you say something, and I'm like, I'll think, and then I'll think, no, this guy's on my side, what's he really trying to say? And that's about making the space, the conversation comfortable, and maybe people get comfortable in the conversation. Noticing the small things that people do on a daily basis that getting back to that positivity is one way that I build up trust very quickly.
Yeah, I'll talk to you later. I think I understand more about the what you mean when you say cultural, I guess. Yeah. We dodged it.
Well done. Any other questions?
Yeah, it's not so much a question, it's sort of an observation, I think. I've noticed this for myself when people try to teach me new ways of communicating. A lot of it sounds very phony because you're kind of given a lot of stock phrases and stuff like that. And I am very resistant to that. And it's not until I can really, truly understand the value of the outcome of this way of being that things begin to change. But I'm wondering if, you know, in order to raise collaboration skills within our industry, rather than sending people on training courses to learn how to talk better, we build environments that create collaboration. And I think that's where, for me, that's where the focus really needs to be. It's like the environment we have in workplaces are not conducive to collaboration. I'm not talking about physical environments as well as emotional and social environments and the way people are expected to behave. So much of that needs to be tweaked and sometimes completely trashed and thrown away and started again before people will even be in that place to begin to collaborate. So I'd like to see a lot more focus on environment for collaboration rather than just techniques. It's not really, like I said, it's not really a question, but have you had any experience of that? Environments blocking people?
I actually agree with what you're saying. I think a big problem is though that we don't value managers who can do that. You know, we don't. So we go and we look and we go, oh, if we do Scrum training, if we do use this structure, it will be all right. And I know I was lucky enough to work under some managers when I started who did that. They just tweaked it. We're going to start this conversation. I think making people aware a bit more about how actually we think might help, and that's partly why I really try to focus on the science to motivate people. But yeah, I don't think it's about compulsion to do a course. I think it's more about giving people the opportunity.
Okay, it's just a comment more than a question, just on what Golkia said. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I think also with collaboration, you know, the physical and social context is quite important. So I'll give you an example. At our work, we don't really have stand-up areas, and people don't like us to have stand-up around their desk because we interfere with other people. So we have to go into little rooms, and it's quite difficult to do stand-ups when you've got to go to a closed room. And the other thing is, you know, in terms of the physical, you know, if you have a drab environment and stuff, it doesn't really generate ideas, you know, and get people kind of talking and stuff. And then with the social, it was quite interesting, the cultural point earlier, because I work with a Malaysian culture where they don't like to kind of question things or raise issues. So in our first retrospective, it was completely silent. I think it was only the New Zealand developers and the New Zealand testers giving feedback. And with that, it's very true what you said earlier. It's all about building that trust and an environment where they feel that, you know, it is a safe place to raise this stuff.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. And I agree 80% what you said, just a little bit of things that I want to just be a devil's advocate. I just have a hint that that's how I interpret it. You are hinting that introvert is somehow not a good thing. Instead, you're trying to make introvert more like extrovert. So do you think maybe it's better to train some specialized people acting like a middleware, who can talk to the extrovert as well as introvert? However, I think if you train introvert, when they are engaging in a conversation with the extrovert, they're always in a inferior situation. Then when they engage in that type of conversation, they might be a bit of a discouraging for them. So what do you think? What's your view on that?
I really love that, because you now remembered, you know, when I stopped in my presentation, I was like, oh, I forgot what I was going to say. They actually said, oh, sometimes I think Scrum is designed for extroverts. So the reason I talk about it, I mean, I don't actually believe that much about introvert and extrovert. I think it's very contextual. The reason I talk about it is because I think there's a lot of people out there who find Scrum very painful. Because they're put in a room, they're supposed to brainstorm out loud, and you know, and that's how all decisions in their team are being made. And what I'm trying to do is actually to give us some options. You know, I mean, there's silent techniques. Also, your question about nothing came up in the retrospective. Maybe there's I'm not a champion facilitator, but talk to a real facilitator, and they might have other ideas about how you can build it up. If I talked about a snake in the course I did, of actually doing it at the time rather than in the meeting, just putting it on a whiteboard, you know, make it even no name attached or something, I don't know. But let's not just, you know, go to Scrum training, find one way of doing a retrospective and keep doing it ad nauseam, and yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Oh, by the way, my introvert. I often feel sorry for myself because everyone thinks that, you know, I have this meek, placid person, you know, whenever they meet him for the first time, but he bosses me around it.
Any more questions?
I'm a former software developer, now an Agile coach, and even I've come out of my shell quite a lot, you know, in that time. And it's nothing to do with me being an introvert. I found, although I was one, it's to do with the nature of our work. As a software developer, we're very up here. We solve problems, and we don't need to communicate those problems, and we often don't. And when I first pair programmed 7 years ago, it was the first time that I'd actually spoken about what I was doing, and it was very hard to communicate in that way. I hadn't used that center of my brain before to communicate about what I was doing. I was usually typing it, you know, so it's a different center of the brain. It's what we look for in our team is, and when we look to hire people for our team, is we look for team players. We don't care whether they're quiet, shy and retiring, as long as they can play nicely with other people. It's the key thing for us.
I mean, and that's great. And if you've got a new team, you can do that. But if you don't, if you work in a government department or something, you can't choose your team. And that was actually what I was trying to point at the start. So what do we do with that? Because that's the reality of many of the teams.
Just one little point. I didn't hear Steph's conversation before, but where does courage come into this? Because often there are things that shouldn't be raised, perhaps, and nobody has the courage to actually utter them. And so the conversation, is that what you were talking about? Discuss the discussion.
Yeah. I was going to say get a consultant. we don't have any ideas on our own.
Just the reason I mention is that, again, it comes back to this possibility that it's a maturity thing, and that a really mature team, agile team, would have the necessary skills, practice, and experience to be able to raise the fact that somebody's being a jerk without it turning into a shit fight.
I think that's context, and I guess the thing, when I'm thinking with a little bit of training, maybe you can do a couple of things. You can up the person's skills at bringing out those things, but also the whole group. Like even if 2 out of 10 people got training, I think conversations would change in the group.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Probably got time for one more, and then we've got to. Here we go.
In your experience with Agile and Agile teams, is it that the teams stay together to get better performance? Like, I'm just trying to think. And we're in waterfall largely. We're in a government department, and we BAs and developers and testers, and they will move to whatever project, because they've got transferable skills. In an Agile situation, would you have fixed teams with product types which will create better productivity and results, or is it that they would move around as well? I'm just trying to think about our structure. We've actually started going Agile, and I'm a manager, and I'm looking at resourcing, and I'm just trying to think what's best for us and what everyone else is doing.
I definitely think there are people more experienced to answer that question.
I was thinking of sports teams.
I mean, generally people stay together, but I mean, if you had a kid in school and they were getting bullied, would you leave them? You've got to open your eyes and actually.
Thank you very much, everybody. If we could show our appreciation to Clare. We're now breaking. There's a more afternoon tea, and then we start again at 4:30.